What they call land inequality, still very much an issue in South Africa. More than 25 years since the end of apartheid, black South Africans make up 80% of the population, but only own 4% of farms and agricultural estates. The new president then considering altering the constitution. His critics say, he says, just looking into it so that land can be taken without compensation. Hello and a very warm welcome to Roundtable with me, David Foster. Now, talk of land seizures or even mild reforms are getting South Africans of all persuasions very worked up. Concerns include a possible rise in racial tensions and an estimated massive hit to the economy. Now, the US president has weighed in.
White minority rule, decades of exploitation and severe inequality. The legacy of apartheid still hangs over South Africa. So, to remedy the imbalance, the president wants to change the constitution so that land can be taken without compensation and given to black farmers. But will reforms only escalate racial tensions? And is expropriation a political ploy by the ruling party ahead of the 2019 elections?
We are tired of being shopkeepers, we are tired of being tellers, we are tired of being garage attendants. We want to be owners of the land.
Under colonial rule, South Africa's Natives Land Act of 1913 stripped most black people of their right to own property, a policy that lasted under the apartheid era until 1994, when Nelson Mandela came to power. But a decade later, most of the country's land still remains in the hands of a white minority. The ANC has made attempts at land redistribution, but slow progress has only increased public frustration. Around 10% has been transferred to black owners since the end of apartheid, which is only a third of the ANC's target. Official figures show white South Africans make up just 9% of the population, but own 72% of farmland, while black South Africans own just 4%. Land reform is a thorny and potentially explosive issue in South Africa. Some fear the plan could lead to Zimbabwe-like land grabs, which saw violent evictions of white farmers, hyperinflation and food shortages. The plan has attracted international criticism as well.
The expropriation of land without compensation, our position is that that would risk sending South Africa down the wrong path.
It's also caught the attention of the US president, who, after watching an inaccurate story on Fox, said he was asking his Secretary of State to study South Africa's farm seizures and expropriations and the large-scale killing of farmers. South Africans were quick to hit back, pointing out Donald Trump was uninformed and accused him of fueling racial tensions.
He don't understand the South African situation. We grew up here, you don't understand the people of South Africa. And, well, I think we have to inform him.
Critics say expropriation without compensation is a serious breach of individual rights.
The taking of land from the indigenous people of this country was the original sin.
But President Cyril Ramaphosa has defended land seizures, saying reform will be done responsibly with strict limitations and democratic debate. With the elections in less than a year, President Ramaphosa needs the popular vote to keep his party in power. And growing anger over the lack of progress on land reform has already seen his party lose some support. It has long promised to redistribute land more fairly. Will taking it without compensation only lead to a different and dangerous imbalance?
Right, let's get the conversation started. Joining us from Cape Town, we have Ebrahim Rasool, leading the ANC party's campaign in Western Cape for those elections next year. Pretoria, South Africa, we're joined by Piet, Chief Executive of Sakeliga, a business lobby group And with me here at the round table, we have Piet Dwyer, South African specialist at Ruskin College, and Chris Vandome, research associate at the Africa programme at Chatham House. We'll come to you two in the studios in just a moment to give us the big picture. But the personal picture is going to come from you two in South Africa. So, Ebrahim, Rasool, let me ask you first of all, do you understand why some people see this expropriation without compensation as stealing?
I would certainly say that those who see it as stealing are those who are experts at stealing themselves. I think that what we should be able to understand is that there's a historical injustice. We are needing to build equity in the distribution of land. We have tried a target of 15% of land reform for restitution. Those who have been denied and dispossessed of their land in the last few decades. But even that has been slow because those who own the land insisted on market values, which are in most cases are inflated in South Africa. And therefore, we have had to consider new ways of approaching this. I want to say, secondly, that the constitution that Nelson Mandela crafted does give permission for expropriation of land without compensation. We have tried the constitutional route. We have tried the route to coax the current owners, and your statistics today show that we have not had much success.
Okay, so let me put this to you. I mean, this may be part of your argument that the white farmers themselves are not willing to take what's on offer. But why not take the land and offer compensation?
I think we have a different need in South Africa. Firstly, we are an industrial economy with farms, not an agrarian economy with some industry. Most of our land needs are for urbanization pressures. Some of our land needs are for equitable farming. And therefore, I think what we are looking at is a hierarchy of lands that we want to expropriate, firstly for the urbanization pressures and also for equitable and non-racial farming. And therefore, I think that when we work out how we get to those lands, there are obviously some that we would want to pay something for it, but we cannot always pay market related. We may have to consider fair value as opposed to market value.
Okay, so there could be some money involved in this. That's to be decided in the future. Perhaps. Let me go to Piet Roux. You can come back on that, Ebrahim, if you like later on. Piet Roux, 12,000 members in your group. I think you said roughly a quarter of them directly involved in the farming industry. What do you make of that suggestion that this was originally stolen property simply being returned to its rightful owners?
I think Mr. Rasool, in the suggestions he has just made, is putting a whole economy at risk and the livelihood of more than 50 million people in the country. Yes, there is no question about it, and everybody agrees with this. We do the constitutional process that Mr. Rasool referred to, that Mr. Mandela and others were involved in and crafted a constitution together. That included that there will be a restitution process. And that restitution process, which everybody agreed, will be about determining in very specific aspects where land was taken unjustly and that should be returned. And that is decidedly not what is at stake now, because everybody still agrees with that. That process is 90+% complete in the country. What is at stake now and what is being suggested is land should be taken without compensation. And there's no way about this. That is a taking, and that is a death knell to an economy. Once you start doing that and you open the door to basically taking stuff and redistributing it, you're undermining the basic propositional statement behind any modern economy, which is
but the ANC, as represented by Mr. Rasool here, the ANC position is that although it was supposed to be willing seller, willing buyer, the sellers are not making it easy for any buyers because they're asking unrealistic prices. So that's where one issue with regard to compensation falls over.
That's a suggestion by Mr. Rasool, but the test for market value is an objective test that you can do with land surveyors and with valuers. So it's very easy to determine. It's not that easy, but there's a sensible international standard for determining market value. And if land should be should be expropriated, then it should be at market value. Mr. Rasool doesn't want to have it done at market value. Neither does Mr. Ramaphosa, the president. And that's what all this is about. It's about whether there should be compensation at market value or not. And if you don't do it at market value, then that's a confiscation, which is a version of theft. And Mr. Rasool suggested that the people who suggested this is a form of theft are good at thieving themselves. I don't want to get into the detail of that, but that is basically acknowledging that this is an illegitimate suggestion.
Let's bring this back to the studio. 1994, ANC, as suggested by both of these guests, agreed that the land should be returned to a majority, or 30% ownership by the black community. And it hasn't done so until now. Is that because, as suggested by Ebrahim, Rasool, the white farmers aren't willing to sell at a realistic price, or the ANC has just parked this and said it's not a priority? Oh, suddenly it is, because we've got elections next year.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, the ANC were promised to give land back to black South Africans, and they failed spectacularly. I mean, some great fighting talk from Ebrahim there about what they're going to do now. The question is, what's took you so long? Why haven't you done this after nearly 25 or more years of a free South Africa? The ANC decided very early on, a political decision, that they would follow a policy question of advice from the World Bank of not to expropriate land, and they would follow the willing buyer.
Because the World Bank said?
There was pressure on the ANC from the World Bank and from outside investors to follow more free market rules, and that's what they did.
Because they thought it would see the South African economy go down the drain.
Well, the South African economy at the time had already gone down the drain. There'd been 0% for a decade. You know, there has been some growth since then, but I think it was part of a major political shift under the ANC and the Nelson Mandela.
Put the question to Ebrahim.
Yeah, what's took you so long, Ebrahim?
I think that there were two pressures on us, or three. The first one was that Nelson Mandela would have suspended an initial expropriation without compensation as allowed for by the Constitution, because we needed to reconcile a nation and to build trust so that we could then have the process of far more equitable management of the land. Secondly, and I've been central to it in the Western Cape, wherever we have tried to restore land to those from whom it has been taken, the willing buyer, willing seller, and the market-related values were the most important obstacle for the state to find the kind of money to get that off to us. The third one was that at that point, the threat to the economy would come from the IMF, the World Bank, and so forth. The threat now to the economy, unlike what Mr. Roux says, is a growing populism on this issue. The pressure is on the ANC, not because of an election, but because of a rising tide of populism within the ANC and outside of the ANC for this to be managed as it is. What we are trying to do as the middle ground, and I should invite Mr. Roux to join us in that middle ground, is to find a sustainable path that does not keep the excesses of privilege happy, which he represents, and certainly prevents the rising tide of populism on the left side, and find a middle path that satisfies the need for land, as I said, firstly, for the growing urban population that needs housing, and secondly, I think, for the non-racialization of farming in South Africa.
Okay. One thing, I'll let you two arrange your own private sort of meeting on this one, although I won't hold my breath about it happening anytime soon. But thanks very much indeed. Listen, Chris, I want to come to you. It's been suggested that there's an awful lot of, a great number of attacks and murders taking place because of this. Well, I mean, this has been disproven by even the agricultural groups, South Africa, that the number of attacks and murders, we must state this now, is at its lowest level for 30 years. But the dangers are still there, perhaps that this could become another Zimbabwe. Right or wrong?
I think there are two key differences between the land debate in South Africa and what happened in Zimbabwe. And the first of those is the role in which land played in the narrative around liberation. And in Zimbabwe, land was much more intrinsic to the liberation narrative. The other difference of that is that the role of land in the political economy of Zimbabwe is very different to that of South Africa. It was much more of an agrarian economy even than South Africa, and the way in which the political economy of the elite in Zimbabwe functioned was through and the maintenance of that elite cohort you had around the previous president was based around patronage, and land was one of those things that was used as a way of securing political power through the patronage.
And the difference here is what?
And the difference here is that that's not the case in South Africa, and the reason why there is international support, or at least tacit support, for President Ramaphosa to continue this, and by international support I mean things like Theresa May in Cape Town recently saying that she supports Ramaphosa on this, is that there is a belief in the strength of institutions in South Africa, and there's not anything really in the post-apartheid periods to suggest that the government would breach that rule of law in doing this. And the other thing is, and this is kind of critical to this, is that internationally, yes, people are waiting for some meat to be put on the bones of this kind of policy vibe at the moment of Landreform. We don't know what the process is actually going to be of that transfer. But in terms of international investment going into the country, it's tied into Ramaphosa. He's the person that the international investors trust to see this through.
Let me go to Piet Roux and ask you if you can see a way round this, not the way you're going to have a coffee with Ebrahim Rasool and talk about the future alliance between his party and your party, but do you see a way around this particular problem? And then we'll discuss any answer you have.
Yes, I think that it is very important that the principles of constitutionalism itself should be respected. And it's not possible to change a constitution to allow confiscation. That is just taking something and not returning, giving somebody money for that. If you do that, that is the element of totalitarianism and arbitrary government. And
do you mind if I jump in? Sorry to jump in at this particular point. I don't want you to argue about the rules as they're going to be changed at the moment, but I want you to see if you can set out any way that you think land reform can be achieved in a peaceful and satisfactory way.
Right. So the first principle is to stick to constitutionalism and respect property rights. And then once we have that settled, and that's what we had settled now for 30 years, and we continue with that, then we say, finish the restitution process. Find those land that has been determined to have been unjustly taken and return that. And that is up to Mr. Ebrahim Rasool's party to do so. So that should be continued. Then about 25 to 30% of the country is in state-owned hands. That is ripe for giving to the people. Then many parts of urban South Africa, especially in the densely populated areas of Gauteng and the metropoles, much of the land there has not been given to people. They've lived on it for decades and they don't have title deeds. So it's not recorded in the official land statistics.
Okay, we'll
so
stop you there just because it's quite a long shopping list, and I'll ask Peter here to respond to the likelihood of that being acceptable or workable in any way. And then we'll come to you, Ebrahim, if we can.
I think Piet and his comrades in the farmers' movement can sleep easy in their beds. The ANC are not an anti-capitalist party. They are led by a billionaire, so they can sleep safely in their beds. And private property in South Africa is not under threat whatsoever. In fact, the ANC went from Soweto and have moved to Sandton. They haven't took the property from Sandton, the millionaires' area. They've moved and lived there. So they're very comfortable with the wealthy and the elite in South Africa. So there's not going to be some big anti-capitalist shift in South Africa. I wish there were, but sadly there's not going to be. Private property is safe in the hands of the ANC, which I think is a sad indictment of the shift to the right of the ANC under Ramaphosa and before, and Ebrahim Rasool as well.
So you just don't think it's even going to get to this stage?
I think that some property will be eventually moved within the Constitution. The ANC have created the Constitution. They've put themselves in a straitjacket. Piet and them are exaggerating the dangers faced by them. The ANC will not take farms and land illegally. Don't forget, every country in the world and every government in the world has a legal right in its Constitution to expropriate land. They do it everywhere in the world. The ANC is simply exercising that.
In this country, we call it compulsory purchase.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
We're not talking about a purchase, gentlemen. We're talking about a taking without compensation. Okay, if it was with compensation,
Pete, we do understand that. I'm just saying in this country, the expropriation of land against the will of the person, etc., is called compulsory purchase. You don't often get very much money for it, by the way.
I'd like to come back to this point. That
is anything that Peter said likely or workable? And then we'll go to Ebrahim.
Well, it's the point that Ebrahim made around populism. And this has come off the back of increasing socioeconomic tension in South Africa based on a very slow progress towards this transformation that has been promised to people. So without that transformation, people are now trying to find a way of unlocking the value that they have. And this is where this argument that Piet's making around the urban lands is coming in. But this is far more complex than just the agricultural land. It's people who are living in informal settlements in urban areas who do not own the land on which they reside, and so therefore aren't able to borrow against that, use that as collateral. That's holding them back. There's also debates around the use of trust lands in rural areas. So this is a very multifaceted debate. But to kind of come back to what I want to put back to both Ebrahim and Piet is that kind of the way forward really is that everyone has a understanding and everyone accepts that this is built on historical injustice. The next step is that in the midst of all these debates, and we've got two very polarized opinions from South Africa, obviously because they're both caught in the midst of a live debate. So it would, they have to take opposing views as this is currently playing out. But it's then looking at where are these compromises going to be? What can we sitting in London see as the potential compromises? Program. And where is it that people can work together? Because that's got to be the next step.
Can I put that out there as a rhetorical question? Sure. Yeah. If you like. And Ebrahim, let me come to you. One of the suggestions is that the ANC is quite happy just to sort of throw this out there as a little bit of fuel on the fire just to get people interested in your policies, but it also has very little interest in following it through, perhaps because A, it understands capitalism and the capital flight there might be if this goes through, and secondly, because it's an old boys club very happy with what its members have achieved in the last 25 years.
Yeah. Look, David, I think it's overstated, but very clearly the ANC will not act to endanger the economy. What endangers the economies is lies fed to Trump and Trump acting on that. I think, secondly, we are, if you have viewed the last few months, every first Friday of the month, we have transferred title deeds to homeowners and others in South Africa, and that is a process that will continue because our people need their property as tradable assets against which to send their children to universities and open small businesses, etc., etc. Thirdly, we are willing to let charity start at home and to find the underutilized state land that should not be nationalized, but that should be put at the disposal of our needs for particularly urban land for housing. And thirdly, I think that it's very interesting how Piet takes so long to come to the 74% that his members would be owning. He first wants us to go to the 26%. And not touch the 74%. And I think that that's the fundamental problem that we have with the right wing.
Okay, so can I just say, Ebrahim, before I go back to Piet to end the programme, one of the things that people are looking at rather cynically about this is that for the last quarter of a century, the ANC's reputation has been one of its senior members enriching themselves and enjoying their lives and not really caring about what happens to a large part of the South African population. How do you change that image?
I think that certainly it's not the last quarter. I think it's the last 10 years, particularly, a venality had set into the ANC that I think is being turned around slowly but surely and hopefully faster as we go forward. And if this process with the Zondo Commission and others take their course, we should be seeing some fairly senior people being jailed for that. That's the only guarantee that South Africans have that this ANC is reforming.
Piet, have you heard anything in this programme that makes you think that A, it's unlikely this is going to happen, and secondly, it's a row that's being perhaps blown out of proportion and can be resolved?
No, I'm afraid that the threat is serious, the threat of expropriation without compensation. We've seen this movie play out just across our border to the north, Zimbabwe. It's played out in Venezuela, all over the world. So I'm still very concerned. I'll give you a short stat on this. For the first time on record, South African local investors are taking more money out of the country and investing less locally than foreigners are investing locally. So that tells you that the sentiment on the ground of people in the know in South Africa, watch what's happening in Parliament, who speak to the politicians, who see where things are going, they are very concerned.
Thank you very much indeed. Quick thought, very, very quick thought from each one of you. We have to hear from the Constitutional Review Committee whether the changes that are proposed can go through. Any idea when that's going to be and whether it'll happen?
No, the constitutional things will be very, very slow. But the key issue here in South Africa is the wealth inequality, and that's the gap between the rich and the poor has gone bigger under the black-led ANC, and that is the tragedy of the last 25 years of South Africa. Because the ANC have followed a free market policy at the dictates of the World Bank and the IMF, which has led to the rich getting rich and the poor getting poorer.
And is this something that's going to blow over? Not what Peter is suggesting here, but this particular political point, cynical ploy, whatever you want to call it.
This is an issue that isn't going to go away. The question is, where do the ANC want this issue to be when they enter into the election campaign next year? They'll want to have something in the process to be able to say this is how this will play out before they then go to the polls. If it's still uncertain then they could have issues.
Hey, listen, thank you. Thank you, both of you in the studio. Thank you, Ebrahim, Rasool from Cape Town, from Pretoria. We thank Piet Roux. Different opinions, but that's what we love on this programme, and we hope that one day you will sit down, perhaps go on holiday together. You've become such good friends. OK, thanks very much indeed, and thank you very much for watching. Very serious subject, but very straightforward and civilised debate. One hopes that the situation in South Africa can be resolved along similar lines. They need a round table, don't they? Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.